Coogs house. Jon Rothstein says that Houston drops from first all the way to 10th in his preseason rankings, depending on Milos Uzan's decision. Is it really that serious?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below as an everydayer that you are, what time of day you're listening. You're an early riser, sometime more like lunch break, maybe on the way home from work, or the case may be, tell us down in the comments down below. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's number one sports. We've got more on that fun later because Jon Rothstein has some important thoughts on the Milos Uzan decision that I think the nation shares. I'm going to talk about what those are and if those are important or not. There's also a big bill happening in Tennessee. It could impact how college athletes are being paid. So we need to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on there and the trickle effect that could have. More on Houston Blue uniforms, too, in the final segment. There's some weirdness happening with baseball program and that. But before we get to any of that, Jon Rothstein says that Houston could drop from first all the way to 10th in the preseason rankings, depending on Milos Uzan's decision. Calls Milos Uzan the biggest will they, won't they enter the NBA draft or stay in the NBA draft, I should say, decision there is. Now, I understand that Jon Rothstein has done this a long time, and frankly, Rothstein likes Kelvin and likes a lot of the things that Houston does. So I'm not here to say that he's the anti. Some people would say he's an anti. I'm not quite that guy. I will say, however, that I do think this decision is important, and I do think that Jon knows a lot about what he's talking about. I don't think it's that significant. I don't think this team can't be a top 10 team or a number one team in America without Milos Uzan. So I want to talk about what that looks like because we have the rotation with Milos Uzan on the screen right now for the video audience. Milos at the point, Pop Isaacs at the 2, Emmanuel Sharp at the 3. I'm projecting Chris Sinak to start at the 4. Jojo Tugler coming back in at the 5. And then if you do not have Milos Uzan, you move over freshman Kingston Flemings, 5-star freshman Kingston Flemings out of San Antonio Brennan. Then you still have Pop Isaacs, Emmanuel Sharp, Chris Sinak, and Jojo Tugler. And I think when you look at those two lineups, both of those lineups could easily be number one team in America come April, come Canandas, come Final Four time, all of that, right? Especially if that whole Eddie Nunez thing gets through where they end up getting to play Sweet 16s and Elite 8s in Houston. But as you look at that run without Milos Uzan, it's not that Milos Uzan would not make this team a dominant team, but that team with 2 5-star freshmen in the starting lineup, and then 3 guys that have a lot of college experience. Jojo Tugler might be Defensive Player of the Year next year. He's probably the Vegas favorite when the season opens to be National Defensive Player of the Year in every category, every team award show or award ceremony, Naismith, Wooden, etc. I think you add in Emmanuel Sharp as the sharpshooter, no pun intended. What am I saying? It's always pun at this point. Pop Isaacs, a guy that showed he could lead Creighton in the few games before he got hurt last season. What was not a kind of injury you worry about being a recurring thing as long as he gets medically 100% cleared. And it sounds like he's on the way, if not already there, on that. I think that's a roster that's going to be fine. Now, the biggest difference to me is between those two rosters, between those two depth charts, is how the season goes. Last season, Houston lost Jamal Shead to the NBA. Came in the season as a top ranked. They were top 3 in most category, in most different rankings, APs, coaches, Sports Illustrated, ESPNs, whatever, right? And Houston went 4-3 in November. And frankly, had 3 close losses to what ended up being very good teams. Okay, San Diego State was just okay. But the Alabama and Auburn losses looked pretty good in hindsight. Really, as good as a loss can be, I guess I should say. And as you look at that later in the season, you also remember, okay, that was Milos Uzan's first time at Houston, whole new system, whole new set of expectations. He broke his nose in the offseason and missed like a lot of the preseason camp and stuff like that. It was, frankly, a basketball-induced injury to his face. And so, okay, like they were warming up, getting used to the season, getting used to Milos, getting used to how things go, right? Makes total sense. That team, after the end of November, lost one game between December 1st and April 1st. One game. And I get that some of those close games are close calls, and you can't roll the dice and win those every single time. I would argue that Houston's culture means you get it more than half of them, but I understand how some of those were like, okay, you don't always get that UCF, you don't always get that Kansas game or whatever, right? The Kansas game in Fall Gallon, what broke them was a slim margin that doesn't happen very often out of 1,000 times. I get that. But we also saw a team that went 4-3 in November translate into, once they got the point guard intermingle with everybody, everyone's gelled together, rebuilding after Jamal Shed left. That team turned into a team that was 65 seconds away from winning a national title. And frankly, like even within that 65 seconds, one or two things happens differently. They're cutting down nets in San Antonio, and they won the whole thing, right? And as painful as that is, I think that's a good reminder for if Uzan chooses to go to the pros and Kingston Flemings gets the start, you might have a rough November. That does not mean anything is wrong, right? Like I already got to get that out of the way now. If Kingston Fleming starts in his first season in Houston, they will probably hit some speed bumps. That's fine. That's totally to be expected. That does not mean they can't be a top team at the end, right? And we said that last November, December. We said in the January. People are like, I don't know. Clearly, things can work out, right? The other part of that I'll say is that if Milos Uzan does come back and your rotation looks like this with him starting, Isaacs, Emmanuel, Chris, and Jojo as the rest of the starting lineup, and then you're bringing Kingston Fleming, Mercy Miller, Isaiah Harwell, Jacob McFarland off the bench, Chase McCarty coming in off the bench. Guys, that team is really, really good. And I understand how that team is a lot better with Milos here. With Milos on that roster, you're not looking to go 4-3 in November. You're looking to make statement wins early. You're looking for excellence often. You're trying to make sure you keep the thing going 100 miles an hour all season. You're not trying to do a whole, obviously they'll be playing better in February and all of that, but you're not looking to take a backseat to anybody at any time, right? You're looking to win the Players Area NIL Invitational in Las Vegas. You're looking to win big time game. That team can run the table in the non-conference league, right? I get how that's different. But the team without him is not 10 spots worse in the national rankings. And it really speaks to how good those other pieces are. It speaks to how talented five-star freshman Kingston Flemings is. And I agree with Jon Rothstein on a lot of things. This ain't one of them. That is not a 10-spot move, right? There are too many other pieces in what Houston's got going for next season. Now, will it be a move that leads to some losses in the first half of the year? It could. Does that mean that with a couple losses in November, you might fall back to 12th or 15th for part of December and January? You might. And then when you're going to run the Big 12 because you're back to playing in stride, you're well gelled, you're figured each other out, etc., you're going to move right back up. We saw it happen, right? And so that's where I see Jon Rothstein being a little bit hyperbolic for his own stuff. Now, he knows a lot of what he's talking about. Obviously, this is a step backwards if you don't resign Milos Uzan. He may make his decision this week. Combine stuff was over on Sunday. Agents are making phone calls to what kind of guaranteed deals they can get their guys and what kind of projections they're looking at after hearing from teams last week. The players themselves heard from teams last week as well. So Milos is taking that all in, making his decision. He needs to take the time to make the decision because it's about his future and the rest of his life. Whenever that happens, we'll obviously be cheering him on whatever direction he goes because he helps Houston get to crazy new heights. And We'll also be breaking it down here at Locked On Cougs, and we'll hit that whenever it comes out. But something that may be coming out very soon is this new legal issue being passed in Tennessee and how it can impact NIL and college football. But first, before we get to any of that, I do want to remind you today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, because the NBA playoffs are in full swing. Every night, highlight performances, big comebacks, crazy shot making, awesome basketball is happening on a daily basis, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live during the action. Player props, performance trends, same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. $200 back in bonus bets if that first $5 bet hits. It's just a deal you cannot pass up on. I don't care if you like the whole Knicks thing. I don't care if you like what they're doing in Indiana, or if you feel some way about them because they're not playing Jarris Walker enough. Whatever the case may be, you can get in on the action at FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 back in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel. Make every moment more FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Park Rangers Locked On Cougs here, looking at some new reports coming out of Tennessee by Ross Dellinger. Yes, that Ross Dellinger, the buddy that tells us all things happening in the business side of modern college athletics. And according to Dellinger, in Tennessee, the Tennessee State Senate is passing a bill, or working to pass a bill, that paves the way for state schools and their collectives to break House settlement rules. Before the House settlement is even officially in place and officially over with, the state of Tennessee is looking to break it. And it would prevent the NCAA enforcement entity from penalizing those schools. What you're seeing here is Tennessee is already preemptively trying to say, hey, we see your House settlement, we see your salary cap, we see all these different things that you're trying to do to limit what we can do in terms of building our roster and building our program. And in terms of building all of our programs, frankly, Tennessee has a football program that had Peyton Manning come through it. So I guess there's a little bit of history there. There's other guys too. I should give them credit. But truthfully, they're trying to build up their department as a whole, right? And so they're saying we're not going to abide by this. The state of Tennessee will not. By any public school in the state of Tennessee will not. And in doing that, right, they're sticking a gigantic middle finger up at the entire NCAA and the enforcement entity that hasn't even really started yet. It was supposed to start with a compensation cap, penalties for rule breakers. It was going to try and clean up the pay for play NIL model, where guys were getting NIL deals and not having to do anything to fulfill them. They're just getting cash for being on the roster and things like that. This was looking to clean up those kinds of things and make those more uniform. And Tennessee says, no, we're not going to do that. They're passing bills right now to not have to do that. You're already seeing P4 or Power 4 conference officials drafting up legislation within themselves, first of its kind of documents that prevent universities from using state laws to duck new rules in college football. What that means is what they're going to do in power conferences is to preemptively keep these Tennessee kinds of things from happening. So to preemptively strike, you're following along here, to preemptively strike that what's happening in Tennessee, Power 4 conferences are already drafting documents that are going to require schools to waive rights to those kinds of things and waive the right to pursue legal challenges against the new entity, College Sports Commission, right? They're going to forcibly make public schools. They can't force the private schools, right? But schools within the Tennessee laws about public schools, not private schools. I'm getting too far down the line here. They're looking to force schools within Power 4 conferences to abide by whatever the NCAA says, or potentially have to withdraw from the Power 4 conference itself, right? It would bind the schools together to one another, aim to create some sort of stability and equality. It would also take this out of the state's hands. Tennessee could not have different rules theoretically than the state of Texas or Florida or Montana or whatever, right? And the goal there would be to kind of have some unity and uniformity amongst the Power Four. At least you'd hope that would trickle into Group of Five, FCS, and so on. However, what that also means that if you try to buck that trend and use state legislation to get around or work around or beat the NCAA's commission, what they're going to do is they're going to kick you out. They're saying you're out of the Power Four. We will not play you further. So now you can't just be like independent and play us on the side. They're not going to play, right? And ultimately would hit you in your pocketbook because you're suddenly losing playing those big dollar opponents and big dollar games on top of all the TV revenue you get from being in that Power Four conference in the first place. And I'm here to tell you, I think that feels like a really big domino. I don't know that it's the domino that people think it is. This feels like a lot of back and forth. People say, look, the Power Four conferences are already trying to fix it, trying to get out of it. And what I see this as becoming is the Power Four conferences not trying to get out of keeping people from breaking NCAA rules. It's the Power Four conferences trying to make their own rules, right? This is the Power Four trying to get away from the NCAA and state legislation and create an entity in and amongst itself, right? You abide by our rules or you're out. We won't play you. What does that do to Notre Dame? What does it do to like rivalries like Houston and Rice? What does it do to schools now within this? And to say more than that, what's to say that they can only do this with NCAA rules and not just make up their own in the first place? You're with us or you're out. You're with us or you're out. And you've got to play a game every 5 days. You're with us, you're out, and you got to play 15 games a year. You're with us, you're out, and you got to, I don't know, eat salami on Tuesdays. Whatever the case may be, they can theoretically, if they can pass this kind of law and have schools duck state legislation, which admittedly is just in turn state legislation trying to duck NCAA rules. If they can force the Power Four schools, though, to abide by one set of rules being the NCAA and not the other being the state senate, then what's to say they can't make Power Four set of rules that make you abide by, gasp, Power Four sets of rules, right? We've been down a slippery slope for a long time, and I am very pro paying the players. The pendulum was too far the other direction for a long time. College sports blew up into a billions and billions of dollar industry while kids basically got sweatsuits and state school paid for. And that's not to say that that's not worth anything. That's not to say there weren't under the table deals being made by all these institutions all the time. Sure, right? However, coaches, administrators, shoe deals, people made a lot of money on those games, right? And so the pendulum has swung back. And now we're looking at this turning into something completely different, right? The pendulum back and forth is going back and forth like crazy. And now you're about to get a Power Four that's removed itself from state legislation, could potentially remove itself from the NCAA entirely because, like, okay, screw you. We don't want to follow those rules either. NCAA says we have to cap this at 20. Power Four says 25. Eat me. Why not? Why couldn't they just do that if they can do this? And I still have to say, and the reason it's a second segment thing, not a first segment thing, is that's admittedly extrapolating a lot on the point. The point here, Dellinger says, state of Tennessee is already passing laws to duck the House settlement. The Power Four is already crafting codes of conduct that would make them not do that. Boom. That's what's currently being done. Anything else would be going forward with it. But if anything in the last 6 years of college sports has taught us, it's that you kind of have to look that far forward because that far comes at you faster than you think sometimes. And so anyway, keep an eye on that as things come up, as things happen. Also, keep an eye on blue uniforms and baseball and some insight about how they got to wear those the other day and what they may look like going forward. But first, Locked on Cougs, host Parker Ainsworth here. talking all things Houston Cougars, including the baseball team today. So on Monday, today's Tuesday, on Monday evening, Will Kunkel, on his own podcast, I don't think it was actually tied to the news stuff, I think it was just a podcast, was talking to Todd Whitting about the baseball program, talking about a number of different things, and it came up that they wore their blue uniforms last Thursday against Arizona. They were the last program of the major sports to get to wear them. Individual sports like track and I guess there's a track team in individual events, but track and golf wore them in different meets earlier this year. Softball wore it earlier in the season. Every other sport's worn it this year, and then actually football wore it last year, right? So theoretically, everyone's going to wear it, right? And baseball wore it last. And frankly, they wore it against Arizona, a good team in the Big 12. And they won on Thursday and won big, 13-4, right? They proceeded to get trounced 22-7 in the next two combined games to wrap up the weekend. And look, some people think you got to look good to play good. Clearly, as far as that goes, they looked the best, played the best in the Blues, right? And they talked over the blue uniform some, Kunkel and Whitting did. And Whitting pointed out they were supposed to wear them against Texas A&M in an in-state rivalry game, or non-conference, but it was a rivalry game earlier, like a week earlier, right? That game gets like horrifically rained out, canceled, doesn't get made up, right? And for what it's worth, it sounds like they did not get them until like that day. Like they were going to get them that morning, playing them that night, kind of like that close to game time, right? They had to file a waiver to get to wear them against Arizona. Because apparently the deal with the NFL, the deal with Amy Strunk of the Tennessee Titans, is that no one's pursuing legal action so long as Houston wears the blue uniforms one game a season against an in-state rival in team sports. So that's why they've worn them against Baylor and UTSA in football and Tech in basketball. And in this case, they're going to wear them against A&M in baseball, right? And what it sounds like happened was after that game was canceled, they had no more in-state opponents left on the schedule. And so they had to file a waiver to wear them against Arizona. Waiver went through. They got to wear them. Listen, I'm not saying the blue uniforms are the reason they won 13-4. I'm saying when they wore something else, they didn't win 13-4. Right? And look good, play good is a very common athlete mantra. I'm not the one to invent no one. It's just a common thing. What I do think is interesting, though, is like the Houston men's basketball program, for all the success that they had this season, they didn't wear red in a single game that they played. Because in terms of road games, this team went undefeated on the road in terms of true road games this season. And the first one they played, they wore black. And they won. So they wore black the rest of them and weren't going to change until they lost. It's not uncommon. Frankly, the men's basketball program, if you're paying attention, like whether it's the Cougar script or the Houston script or the throwback or the whatever uniform they're wearing, they do this with everything they do, right? Sampson wears the polo he's got on until it takes a loss, and then he changes polos. It is not uncommon across sports, but certainly on this campus for athletes and coaches alike to wear something till the good luck wears off, right? Whether that's all, mojo and placebo and in your ears or whatever, that's the way a lot of people think. And I'm not saying that there's anything to it. I am saying that it's not uncommon for athletes in general to kind of feed this luck of the charm kind of deal. And baseball players even more so. Baseball players hitting a baseball, getting a hit. It's the kind of thing that if you do it 1 out of every 3 times, you're incredible at it, right? And so of course, any slight edge or just feel good about yourself luck would be a big deal in baseball. This is not uncommon. And I think the bigger deal here is, to me, is that it's still Amy Strunk and the Titans calling the shots here. Look, I don't care if you like the blue uniforms, hate the blue uniforms, feeling different about the blue uniforms, want to be a different shade of blue, want to wear gray, whatever the case may be. I think it's safe to say that we can all agree that Amy Strunk, shoot, Cal McNair, I don't care, anyone outside of the university, no one outside the university, and maybe Nike Jumpman as the local sponsors, right? As the uniform sponsors, I should say. But no one outside the school and Nike and Jumpman should be allowed to tell Houston what they can and can't wear in terms of colors. If they want to show up in pink for breast cancer awareness, do it. If they want to go camo for military appreciation, do it. It's their school, their uniform, their team, their season. If they want to wear blue because they played really well in it one day and they feel like it's, good luck, they should be allowed to just pick it up and put it on. And I don't feel right that someone else is telling them. And I know I can see the comments coming right now. It's an Oilers color. Da, 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 da. Clearly, recent listeners, right? We talked about this before, that the color blue is the color of the city's flag. It was the cop car color. It was all over the city, murals and city artwork and stuff like that alike for a long time. Yes, the Oilers wore blue. But the Oilers didn't wear blue because oil is blue. Because, spoiler alert, it's not, right? The Oilers wore blue and with red and white because those are the colors for Houston. The one to wear oil colors has been blacks and silvers and, maybe brown for the dirt they're digging through it. Like, it would not have been that color scheme, right? Now, I know there's always people who said, well, so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. I get that too, right? But even if it's down to the pigmentation of the color or the whatever it is on the wheel of whatever, Amy Strunk and the Tennessee Titans cannot control what Houston's baseball team wears. They're not mimicking an Oilers jersey in terms of a baseball team, right? The very first Lovey Coogs uniform was very close. I think it was different enough that it would have held up in court. I don't think it would have been that big a deal, but it was close. So I see there a little bit. But ultimately, right, we can't let these outside forces shift what the inside wears, right? Even if it's not blue, the team want to get to wear what they want to wear. And if the guys feel good about the blue, then darn it, they should wear the blue and roll with it. It's not that complicated. At least I don't think it is. If you think it is, you can tell us in the comments down below. You can tune into us each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. Think about all things Houston Cougar baseball as they enter the Big 12 tournament. All things Houston Cougar football. Let's look at the offseason and what else arises with the impending house settlement and more. A roster movement, roster construction as it happens. If we hire a new softball coach, which we need to do soon, we'll talk about it here. I'm looking for some guests that know a lot more about softball than myself to have on when it happens. We'll also be talking all things Houston Cougar basketball. And obviously, whenever Milos Uzan drops his decision, we'll be on it as quickly as possible and the implications for the Cougs down the line. Thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. For a second listen, I'm recommending Locked On College Basketball. I say Andy and Isaac and Leaf Tulane handle all things men's college basketball over that way. So go check them out. Locked On Cougs, primarily the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.